Hello. Today I'm going to talk about transferable skills as a librarian because one of the things I ran into when I went out onto the open market after working in librarianship for my career, having a master's in library and information studies, is people didn't really understand what that meant. Like if I could give it like a subtitle like librarian information and resource management, I would, because as much as it's information management, it's also a lot of resource management. How to order books, keep ahead of the orders. I mean, in the job I had, one of my biggest tasks was making sure to coordinate with the bookstore and acquisitions at the library to make sure that all the books were there on time for the medical students to use, because they only had like a block at a time to get through, and then on to the next block, on to the next block, on to the next block. So if the books weren't there for the right block, they weren't getting very far. So I always had to make sure that they always had the books and they were there. And if not, I always had another way around it, like be it an older edition. And there was a lot of coordinating with the primary program to make sure it was there. So it's a lot of resource management. It also meant going through all of my books every year to see if there's anything up that I needed to update or add in new, or if there's any gaps in my collection. In other jobs previous to that, I would even do entire analysis of a collection to be able to see where the gaps were. When I was a career information assistant, it was that they needed more resources for different genders, for women, and well, this is also 20 years ago too. And for disabilities especially, is for careers for people with disabilities. There were big gaps there, so I was able to do these analysis to be able to fill those gaps. This is what a librarian does. So you don't see really there, but you see it. You see it in the collection by having those accurate books, by having the resources available that you need at that time. Every book that would come through my little resource center that I had as a librarian, I'd go through the table of contents, index, and flip through the whole book. And so I'd have that in my memory. And when I eventually found my way to the management tables, whenever there was a subject that came up, I'd be like, I have a resource for you if you would like after. And I'd give them the book and they'd have the resource. Any books, and they end up creating a relationship where I could get the resources for them, right? It's about resources to do the job. Sometimes it involves technology, like what technology we need to be able to share files between one another for information sharing and document sharing, because that's the other part of it. It's information, resources, and documents. But documents are resources to me in a way, like books are resources, documents are resources. They're resources because you need them to be able to do the job. Like you need those textbooks to study to be able to do the exams. Information management would be like when I was structuring the files, what information is important to people to be able to find their files. Information behavior falls into that too. How do people go and find their files? Like one of the projects I took on was to, of course, hi, is there anything I could do? Me taking initiative. And it ended up being this massive, wonderful project. And it was restructuring. And so I actually observed people's information behavior. How did they go on their computers to access the files? Where did they go? How did they name them? What type of documents did they use to be able to create an environment that is accessible and utilizable by everybody who's using it, or most, right? Because it's very difficult to appease absolutely everybody, but it allowed me to obtain the most universal design possible in a database. So it would be accessible to majority of the people, and those who had difficulties were identified and worked with directly. It was great. I really do appreciate all those experiences, but these are what makes a librarian. What I found interesting too, though, is there are some jobs I went into over my time that use more of my librarian skills than even working as a librarian. Yes, I did learn how to write grants and community surveys and stuff like that, which was phenomenal in the public library sector. How to search and manage government documents. Oh my gosh, that alone I use on a daily basis, because that you have to use in any aspect of your life, in your personal life, in your business, everything. Knowing when and where and how to access government documents, absolutely invaluable. I love shifting and weeding projects because it allowed me to see what all the resources were. So I have them in my memory. People ask for resources, and I add even more um, resources I could access because I knew they were there to be able to give to somebody. Because that's always the thing. If you don't have a way to find the resources or have somebody with the corporate knowledge of where to access a resource, how are you going to get that resource? Where are you going to get it without it being a big cost, uh, highly time involved? And this is where a librarian comes into play, especially when you have a lot of resources to manage, information to manage, big groups of people that need to share documents and documentation to do their jobs too. This is all a part of it. So much so where when I found myself as a call center trainer, I end up using so many of my librarian skills. It was crazy. Like even building the database, the PDF file for um, the staff to use on the floor, and transferring that into being more of a online guide that's more searchable and has better indexing to be able to find stuff on the rapid. So when you get a call, you're able to find the information quickly to be able to better serve your customer. So you're not sitting there waiting for the information, because especially in that environment where it's roadside assistance, that level of patience is not going to be there. So the quicker they could access that information, the better. And, I was able to use that skill there, building training programs for my colleagues, like how to be able to use this software to be able to build our training, to be able to share. Yes, this was, again, another satellite position. And I was able to send this advice to the primary site. It worked out. I do hope it still works for them, honestly. And if not, they found an even better solution, perhaps. Never know. But technology evolves, and keeping up with that is also a part of the job of a librarian, is to keep apprised of that. So if you're an organization that wants to know what's happening and new, another odd job I picked up was actually waking up before the crack of dawn and going through this database that had metacrawled all the news articles on particular topics, and I would have to read all through them and create and write a synopsis based off the format that they had predetermined with their client. And it was synthesizing data like that is a huge part of it. It does take a particular type of brain. I'd go through thousands and thousands and thousands of results to be able to choose which ones are the proper ones when doing systematic reviews. Tens of thousands of results sometimes. I'd get quite, a lot of questions from my community that I served to be able to look up, is there any articles on this? And for those professors and researchers, I was able to do that. Whereas if it was a student, it was like, come in, I'll show you. I'd be happy to show you. I mean, I was happy to show anybody. Like, I can teach you or I can get it for you. And usually there was a combination of the two, depending on the relationship to the organization. It's really neat. So this is what a librarian does. And when I went into the parts world, I found that all of the serves, because it was searching fiches and diagrams. It's all databases, right? It's people coming up with really vague, I need this kind of thing for this thing to do this thing. And you're working off that information, because that's one of the other things that we learn as a librarian is how to ask reference questions. What do we say to them? How do we word it? How do we get them to tell us what they're really after? And like, but even working at Blockbuster, I'd have people coming up to me. I was here last week and there was this video that looked like this on the cover. And I'd be like, course, visual memory. Oh, I know which one you're talking about because I had a really good idea of where everything was in the store at all times. So I was like, oh, it's over here, and here you go. That type of memory serves well as a librarian. So anytime you have these types of superpowers, it's nice to find the field that actually makes good use of them. And to me, it was librarianship. It's practically a vocation. I breathe it. Um, as I was getting into parts more and more, I was actually curious about inventories because that's, as I mentioned earlier, doing weeding and inventorying and is and collection development is very important to me because it allows me to build a collection specific, timely, and usable to my community population. So I decided to get the only warehouse and parts books I could possibly find from the Ministry of British Columbia and to be able to understand really how to build a proper resource center, a proper shop resource center that had tools, the measuring things needed. And if they came up to me and had a certain question, I knew what they were talking about, like, screws, pitch and diameter. Okay, now I understand that, I need a vernier caliper for that. I even bought the particular measuring things so that instead of like screwing around, take the screw. Oh, it's this one here. Okay, do we have one of these? Perfect. And they were on their way. Build the efficiency by having the resources accessible, and it requires having reference tools. And that's also what I decided to special in was in reference. Having reference tools for me, especially with disabilities, is how I get around. Reference tools are accessibility devices to me. And I have fun with it. But that's what makes life easier. I even had a little mirror up because mirrors are one of the most unsung accessibility tools out there. I even had a mirror to be able to see behind me in the warehouse so nobody could sneak up on me, but also so I could be able to see what was behind me, to be able to better serve people. And having just a mirror made enough of a difference as a tool to be able to give me reference points of places around me. Mirrors are heavily used in libraries, especially for safety going around shelving, using convex and concave mirrors up on the walls so you can be able to see around the corners, right? It's important to be aware of these things, as safety is also a huge part of librarianship. Emergency measuredness planning, emergency preparedness planning. There we go. And we had to learn how to do that and do those I even did them for archives specifically, but I also ended up going down the archival route for a number of years as well. So I got these books from the Ministry of British Columbia to be able to better learn what their system is. Like a library uses Dewey Decimal, and how is inventory in the parts world supposed to work? And so I then went down that rabbit hole to learn. And then I also went up the rabbit hole where I was working to be able to understand how they organized and what their mentality was in it. It was really interesting to learn, but it also made me realize how transferable those skills really are as a librarian. And it may not be realized. Um, I know they try to rename libraries and librarians to be able to have people better understand. But honestly, if you called somebody a resource manager, would that really lend better understanding? But that's only one aspect of a librarian. So it actually is a bit of a false. Because if we say it's an information literacy librarian, well, okay, they do that too. But they also manage resources. They also do teaching. They also, there's a lot of different elements of a librarian. So rather than rename librarian, I'm here to teach you a bit more what a librarian means so you better understand. And so when you see somebody with a master's of library and information studies, you'll think they've applied to this job for a reason. I've seen a lot of my colleagues thrive in public positions even because they're good at doing the grant writing and dealing with partnerships, because as a librarian you have to deal with a municipality, especially if you work in public, right? You have to deal with the municipality, the trustee board, um, employees, staff, students, your employer and your supervisors as well, right? Like that's a lot of management. Plus, it's, community stakeholders as well. These skills to be able to navigate all of those things, like the amount of partnerships that I navigated over my time actually blows me away. To think in retrospect, it's like, wow, I was really involved with that many different pieces as a solo librarian. That, you know, that's actually kind of neat, but that's part of what we are trained to do. So I could see that being really useful, say, in a project manager. And when I was teaching project management later on in my career, I did see a lot of overlaps with the way that library management is taught. I could see it being very useful for teaching in different avenues, adult education, and you're specialized as a children's librarian, as a children's resource educator, supporter in the schools, perhaps. Um, Inventory, resource management. Like there's a lot of other options out there. The thing is it may not pay that master's level salary because it's not recognized as being a transferable skill that is worth money. Because, like if we look at pay scales, it they don't have a rhyme or reason in the private sector, it seems. It's just like they assign, like, oh, this job should be this much, this job should be this much. They don't look at the individual skills to say, like, oh, well, this skill requires this level of education, so we need to pay this. There's not that level of analysis in most HR. Let's be honest. There is, like, it requires hiring a person, having the money to do that level of analysis. And very few would be in that position to do so. So, I mean, the chances of that even happening, it can. It can. As people evolve, as things become more aware, it totally can happen. I see, I grew up in the 90s where the way that wages were laid out was different. Like, babysitting even had a different wage range, and different types of jobs of, level of experience required had a different range. And now it's just flat. Like this flattening of a system really has forced the private sector to create their own benchmarks, but they're hard to find. Those white papers are not in existence in certain industries. It's only in certain privileged industries that there is that level of analysis and money to do that analysis. Unfortunately, a lot of the jobs that a librarian would be qualified for, you have to be prepared for significant wage decrease versus what you would get in as a public librarian, which is lower, as an academic librarian, and so on and so forth. There are some unicorn positions out there, absolutely. And there are private sector that are waking up to see that, having a librarian might actually be pretty freaking cool. One of the options they had given librarians back when I was in library school was to do a split degree to do it with a law degree to get an LLB, or with an MBA or an MP, I think, a Master of Business Administration, Master of Public Administration. And I think if I wasn't so burnt out at that point and also indebted, I might have I wish I could have continued those extra 2 years in a way, because then it would have better positioned me, because librarianship skills are all highly transferable skills that are foundation to just about any job out there. So I can see how it would serve people as a second career as well as, and I can see why in like the States it's very common to see, an MLIS and say a Master's of Arts or Master's of Science, because you that way you have the specialty of how do you find it and how do you manage it, along with the subject matter expertise. I end up developing a subject matter expertise over my time just by sheer falling into being a medical education librarian, which was perfect for me. I thought it was wonderful because given, I've always had an affinity for working in health in that kind of field. So I end up being the specialist for Bachelor in Nutrition with a Practice Evidence Nutrition, and Research Methods instructor in Natural Nutrition as well over my time. So I ended up falling into this very naturally. My subject matter expertise is being a Jill of all trades, being able to switch between disciplines, going from being interdisciplinary, being able to switch from sociology to nutrition to medical education to business to economics to family studies to criminology to engineering. Yes, that I've had to go in that delve, but that was because somebody was doing project. Um, that way, I mean, I go even into law and legal, into public administration, into nursing and psychology, like kinesiology. Had to be able to switch between all of these to be able to cover assisting the students in teaching them how to succeed in their own projects, and then supporting the professors, the teacher, the support staff, and whoever else had falling into purview, right? And that's where a librarian almost requires to be part of a community to serve. Because without a community to serve, what's the librarian doing? Who is the librarian serving? And when I went out on my own as the Unlibrarian, that became a question. Who am I serving? How do I find those doors to knock on and be like, hey, what are you up to? And what projects do you need? And build that way. Especially, I had limitations with technology to be able to cross those barriers. And then the world closed down, so I couldn't even make those physical connections. And then it was challenging. I have found a group of people and over time but it's not the same. A librarian is meant to be part of an institution, whereas the unlibrarian, I'm outside of an institution. I'm not part of any institutions, which gives me a place of advocacy because sometimes when you're working within those institutions, you don't want to risk your job. And that's just the honest truth of it. Yes, there's unions. Yes, there's all this. There's evidence right now in Ontario of 3 unionized librarians getting set up to being sent to the door. And now their statistics will never reflect the same ever again because the programs will not be properly filled. The programs that would be bringing people in. So are they trying to download it onto lesser paid people? Make them do a librarian's work and overload them and cause them to burn out? And then no. It's not quite right. But this is where I am on the outside and can say these things. The joys of being retired. But that's where I do these videos only once a month, right? Because it's got to stir in there a little bit. You got to have enough things to talk about. So in librarianship, there's a lot of transferable skills to use. It's different than you might think. Every librarian has their own specialty as well, I might add, just to spice things up a little bit. But that's why you can't really call a librarian by any other name than by a librarian. Because a librarian is a librarian is a librarian, just as a rose is a rose is a rose. All right. That's enough rambling for me today. Time for me to go back to my coffee. I wish you all a very wonderful day, and thank you for listening to more advocacy on librarianship. Cheers. I don't drink anymore. I don't know what to say anymore. Cheers is nice, but simply, I wish you all the best. Perfect.